So this week we are going to be talking about another lens review, and this one's a little bit unique. This one is going to be the Canon 400mm 5.6L. So if you guys like gear reviews like this, let me know by either liking or subscribing or even commenting if you don't like the gear reviews, if you'd like to see something else. Let me know down below because I do viewer requests. So if you have a question or a specific thing you want answered, I will answer it in a future episode. But like I said, this week is all about the Canon 400mm 5.6. So a little bit of the basics about this lens. First, it is an all-metal lens, so everything from the lens hood, the body, the collar down to the bottom, it's all metal. So it's kind of a heavy lens, but one of the cool things about this lens is that it actually has a fully retractable built-in lens hood, so you don't have to worry about losing it, and you can always have the front element protected. It's very easy to pull out. It just pulls out like that, screws on, now it's in place. So it's very easy to use, and it's always actually on the lens. You don't have to worry about losing it. Another unique feature about this is the built-in tripod collar. So you can see down there at the bottom, it's got a little mount, so you can actually mount the lens directly to the tripod. Now, the reason this is a little bit beneficial for you is because rather than putting a lot of stress on the mount of the camera, the lens mount on the camera, it's going to be a lot less stressful because this is a big, heavy lens. It's going to put a lot of kind of tension on the lens mount. So that's all that does. It sticks on the tripod like this, camera hangs off the back, and you're good to go. Now, another unique feature about this lens, which is kind of more common in some of the long focal length cameras, is that it actually has a separate focus switch. So of course it's got the standard autofocus and manual focus switch, but it also has one right here that you'll see says 3.5 meters to infinity and then 8.5 meters to infinity. So you can kind of select which one will work better for you in certain circumstances. Now the benefits for a switch like this is, number one, if you switch it to the 8.5 meters to infinity, you're gonna have faster autofocus performance overall because there's gonna be less opportunity for the lens to try to rack focus from, if it's trying to guess focus, it's gonna have less room to focus all the way back and then all the way forward and try to figure out what's best. So that's a little bit faster, but I think where this really comes in handy is with a lot of sport shooters. If you're shooting through like a fence or something, if you have the fence sort of like in a medium distance, you can actually set it to 8.5 meters so that the camera will never actually try to focus on the fence in front of you. So first we're going to talk about the negatives of the lens because I think that I really like to end on a positive note, so we'll start with the negatives. Now, the first thing is actually a combination of two issues with this lens. Now, the first being is that it's an f5.6 lens. So that means that the widest the aperture will go is 5.6. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what that means exactly, the aperture obviously lets in light. So the wider the aperture is, or the smaller the number is, the more light will come through the lens and hit the sensor. So f5.6 is not really a wide aperture at all. f2.8, or even like f2 or f1.4, those are like really wide apertures that will let a lot of light in. So f5.6 doesn't let a lot of light in. Now, under normal circumstances, that wouldn't really be a big issue because, you can always set your shutter speed to like 1/100th of a second, or maybe just pop up the ISO a little bit. But it really becomes an exaggerated issue with a 400mm lens. The focal length of this lens is obviously 400mm, so when you're actually shooting stuff with this, it's very, very zoomed in. So any sort of twitch in the camera is really going to exaggerate the kind of the camera shake that you have. And so when you have an f5.6 lens that doesn't let in a lot of light, you're going to have to be sort of figuring out a way to maximize that light, and you cannot do that by having a slower shutter speed, because if you have a slower shutter speed, the shake will be more visible. So I'm going to show you some pictures right here just to kind of show you an actual example of issues with the shake on this lens. So I normally like to keep this lens around 1/1000th of a second just to kind of ensure that there aren't any issues with like motion blur from shaking the camera. So I'm going to show you two pictures right here, one at a slower shutter speed and one at a higher shutter speed to kind of show you this example. Now I'm going to include these images in a download link down in the description if you want to check out how sharp the lens is or how it performs. Check down below in the description and I'll have those links for you. So the first one that I'm going to show you is at 1/200th of a second. Now, if you zoom into 100% on this, and actually, I'll probably zoom in even further than that for you, you'll actually notice that there's quite a bit of blur from actually shaking the camera right here. Now, this is sort of if you're pixel peeping, but, in a lot of situations where you're doing like maybe sports photography or something like that, that's a huge issue. You don't want to have any motion blur. So if you set your shutter speed to, around 1000 or maybe even 2000, here, I'll show you one right here for 2,000th of a second, and you can see the difference in sharpness from having that higher shutter speed and zoomed in super, super close. You'll see it's incredibly sharp, but it has to be at 1/2000th of a second. Now look at that. That's f5.6, 1/2000th of a second at ISO 800. So ISO 800 is pretty high, especially if one of your cameras doesn't really necessarily perform well at that ISO. That can be a huge, huge issue for you. So another drawback to this lens is that it is a fairly large lens. It's not the most travel-friendly lens. With the lens hood fully extended, it's 14 inches long. And then if you retract it, it's still over 10 inches long, so that's not very travel-friendly at all. You actually have to have a bag that you will be able to fit this in. So you have to make sure that your bag can in fact fit this lens if you want to bring it around. And then to kind of make the issue worse, obviously you have the tripod collar down at the bottom, so that's just another little piece of bulk sticking out of the lens that you have to deal with. Now, this is removable, so if you really, really needed to, you can actually take this off and voila, it's just sitting there on the side. So that is something you can do if you need to, but I would really recommend having a bag that can fit this lens before you actually buy it. So another negative, this is sort of a niche lens. There's really not too many situations that you need to be using this, unless maybe you're doing like sports photos or something like that. I use it for landscape photos, and I'll kind of go into that in a little bit, but it is a very niche product, especially when you kind of take into account how much it costs. Now, it's not a super pricey lens, especially when you take into account that it's actually a Canon L series lens, so one of their like premier lenses. I think it's around $1,100 on Amazon. You can find it for cheaper prices other places. I'm not really sure why the prices vary so widely, but I will have that link down in the description if you want to check out some of the more detailed features of this lens. But it is about $1,100, so that is a bit pricey, especially if you don't know what you're going to be using this lens for. So now for the positive pieces about this lens, because there are a bunch of great things that this lens does. And the first being is that it is super, super sharp. This is probably the sharpest lens that I own, which honestly isn't really saying too much. I think the only other lens that may be in comparison is the Canon 24-70L lens. But this is a super, super sharp lens, which is saying a lot because, like I said, this lens is a 24-year-old lens. So to be able to keep up with some of the modern lenses of today, that's pretty impressive. I'll show you a few examples of the sharpness here, and also let me know down in the comments if you would like me to include a few, just like sharpness examples, maybe just taking pictures of a textured rock. I can include it in the download link. But it is incredibly sharp, and it can be used for a ton of unique images. Now, some of my most unique images are from this lens because I use it for mostly like landscape or architecture type photography. So a lot of people out there are usually shooting with really wide angle lenses for a lot of that stuff. So to be able to go out and shoot a 400mm where somebody might be shooting a 16mm, you can get a lot of shots that either are rarely done or maybe have never been done before. So that is something very, very cool. I'll show you a few pictures right here of some like unique shots that I got like in New York using this lens. It's one of my favorite lenses, and I've got some pretty impressive shots with it. So believe it or not, even though this is a 5.6 lens, it is a bokeh monster. I mean, the background blur that you can get with this lens is absolutely absurd. And the reason being is that even though it's a 5.6, it's a 400mm lens, so you can get a lot more background blur with a zoomed in lens than you can with a really wide angle lens, which I'm sure you've encountered before. So I'm gonna show you a picture right here. This is of a flower down in Borrego Springs, and it was at the minimum focus distance, so it was as close as I could possibly take a picture of it. And you'll notice that the flowers in the background are completely obscured, and it can really single out single objects very, very well. So that is something that really I was not expecting when I got this lens. I was kind of thinking it wouldn't be able to do that, but it is a very nice surprise for you, especially if you're doing like portrait type shots. I mean, this isn't a portrait lens, but you can get some really cool portraits, and my girlfriend's gonna kill me. I'll include some images down below in the links from some test shots I did the other day using this lens. Now look at how blurred the background is and how sharp my girlfriend's face is. Now you can count like all the pores on her face. She's gonna hate that, but you can see every little detail, which is incredibly impressive, because maybe you're going out and trying to buy maybe a $2,000 lens that might be used for portraits. You might be able to save yourself a few bucks by going out and buying one of these, because you have the nice features like the blurred background. It's super sharp, and there is zero distortion on this lens. I mean, there's absolutely none. Obviously, it's a 400mm lens. You're going to be getting barrel distortion, but that is something that you want to keep in mind, that this lens optically is as close to flawless as you can probably get. Now, even though I said that this is a fairly heavy lens and it's pretty long, when you take into account some of its counterparts, like the 400mm 2.8, this is actually a really tiny lens. And every time I kind of take this out and just show it to somebody, they're actually surprised by how small this 400mm is, because I think the Canon 400mm 2.8 is like over 8.5 pounds. So 8.5 pounds versus 2.75 pounds, that's a massive difference. And obviously that one is not travel friendly at all, but it is more compact than you'd think it is. I mean, I can't really tell if on camera this is small or big, but it is not as big as you'd think it would be. So another thing is that the autofocus works fantastic. I've used it on my Canon T3i, which is an old camera, but the autofocus has never failed me. And to be honest, I don't really use the autofocus too much, so I can't really comment on how well it works in different situations, but it does work very, very well. So in conclusion, like I said, this is a fantastic lens, but it does have some drawbacks because it's very niche. So it's got a 5.6 aperture, and it's just not necessarily like the ideal lens for something you'd be wanting to do. But if you're looking for this in a like landscape type world, definitely check it out. At least check out the link in the description where I have some images available for download, or even just some images that people have taken online elsewhere. Definitely check it out, because you can get some incredibly unique shots that maybe have never been got before, or people just never ever see. So it is something cool in that respect. And overall, like I said, fantastic lens. I would highly recommend it. So if you can, subscribe to my channel, because next week I'm going to be coming out with another gear review for some piece of gear that I have laying around. Like and also comment, let me know what you thought. Do you have any questions about this lens that I can answer for you down in the comments? And I do want to thank you guys for watching the entire video, and I will see you on the next one.